Hey, I'm not sure if you know about this, but I was a speaker and a trainer for Google for nearly 6 years. In addition to this, I've been a coach through a lot of my career, helping small business owners and entrepreneurs improve their businesses. But now with ADHD, I've learned a lot about helping other wise squirrels like me. Check out the link at wisesquirrels.com/coaching and book a free session with me to see if I can help you. I have a feeling I can. Welcome to Wise Squirrels, the podcast for late diagnosed adults with ADHD. I'm your host, Dave Delaney. One of the things about having a podcast is you really find yourself speaking to a microphone when you're not doing an interview. And that's lovely. It's a lovely little microphone. But there's something missing here in Wise Squirrel. So now, of course, if this is your first time listening, you can skip this part. If you've been listening for a little while, the thing that's missing most from Wise Squirrels is your voice. And I would love to hear from you. So you can visit wisesquirrels.com/comments and you can record a comment there, or you can email me an MP3 recording of your comment or your question, and I will make sure to answer it on an upcoming episode of Wise Squirrels. My guest today is a familiar voice if you've been listening to Wise Squirrels for a little bit. George Sachs is a clinical psychologist specializing in ADHD and autism. He's the co-founder of Inflow, the popular ADHD app, and he's the founder of the Sachs Center, a telehealth psychology practice focused on the testing and treatment of ADHD and autism. He is also a sponsor of this podcast. Now, the interview today is not part of the sponsorship package. It's something I wanted to do because George really is an expert on ADHD, and we spoke a lot about his adult diagnosis of ADHD, his own personal journey, and there's a lot of great takeaways from today's conversation. We spoke about ADHD being a problem of motivation. We talked about misdiagnosis and mistreatment for ADHD, comorbidities of ADHD, things like anxiety and depression, OCD, bipolar. We spoke about shame and the old superpower association. And you're going to learn about some strategies that you can use in your day-to-day to improve life with ADHD. I would be remiss not to mention checking out Inflow at wisesquirrels.com/inflow. And now, let's get on with the show.
My name is George Sachs. I'm a clinical psychologist specializing in ADHD and autism. And I have a national private practice called the Sachs Center focused on ADHD and autism. And I'm also the co-founder of Inflow, which is the first and largest digital therapeutic app for adults with ADHD.
Yes, and our listeners will be familiar at this point, I would hope, and I hope they've signed up for the awesome ADHD traits quiz that you've created. I think it's fantastic. So those familiar will be familiar. Full disclosure that Inflow has been a proud sponsor and of Wise Squirrels for several months now, and we thank you for that, of course. If we back up a little bit, and I know we've talked before about your own ADHD. When were you diagnosed?
Well, I was born with ADHD.
Yes.
Like all of us. But it wasn't until graduate school that I really realized I had ADHD. And it was when I went to graduate school. And by the way, I went to graduate school at 31. And it wasn't because that wasn't the plan. It's just that I barely scraped through college, just crossed the finish line barely. Because even though I majored in psychology and that was one of my interests, it was just so boring. And also, the executive functioning required in college is significant compared to high school.
Right.
Where I tell all the parents, it's going to be a big transition because you've been doing a lot of the scaffolding. Well, my parents back in the day, I'm Gen X, didn't do any scaffolding, as you know, but the school did, and providing structure. And then I got to college and I was like, I don't have to go to class. I don't really understand that concept, but barely made it out. And then took 10 years to try to I spent 3 years in Asia. And I recommend this to everybody. I found that one of the greatest things I've ever done is found a program called Princeton in Asia. You don't have to go to Princeton to go there, but it's based at Princeton. Okay. It's kind of a not-for-profit, and they find you jobs, recent college graduates, jobs to teach English in Asia. And you don't need any experience to teach. You don't need any knowledge of teaching English.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
And for people like me who were like, what am I going to do with my life? I don't know. All my friends were rushing to become lawyers and doctors or whatever. And I just was like, I'm exhausted. I'm so burnt out from this experience. So of just getting through that, I decided to do something like this. Plus, I grew up with this comic book called Tintin.
Yeah.
And read all the Tintin books and just fell in love with travel. And he would have all these adventures, Tintin in Tibet, Tintin in the Red Sea. So it just had this fantasy of living in different countries. And through that program, I was able to go to South Korea, and I had one of the best years of my life.
That's incredible. That's amazing.
I wasn't done traveling while I was teaching, and I had an apartment there, and I was with some other Americans. But then I decided to move to Japan for 2 years to study Japanese and basically prolong the adventure, because I wasn't really done yet after a year. And so I lived in Japan, in a southern island there, and lived in a little Japanese village, which was amazing as well. Lived with a family and had just an opportunity to travel all over Asia. And then finally came back, and now I was like 23, but in ADHD years, that's more like 18, So there's a 30% difference, I believe, in chronological age between ADHD adults or kids and neurotypical kids, or as I call them, the mythical kids, because nobody's really actually neurotypical,
Yeah.
Anybody could, everybody's got something. It's just not ADHD, but they got something, anxiety or depression or OCD.
Yeah.
So, and then I came back, and I didn't know I had ADHD, but I recognized I needed to do some career that was fun, interesting. So I actually pursued a career in children's television. I was always fascinated by that. And I worked with a guy this was in New York City in the 90s, very exciting time. My office was down in Soho, which is not the Soho it is now.
Right.
And anyway, I did that for a few years, creating TV shows. And then the internet popped up. And it's a similar feeling to AI now, like this really cool new thing, but it was the internet. What's this? Get an email address. And if your email is your name, your first name, period, last name at Gmail, you're a Gen X.
Yes.
Yes. Because your kids probably have like 1, 2, 4, 5, not right?
Yeah. Well, luckily they both have their names.com, and my son, who's in his first year of university now, I've redirected that domain to his LinkedIn profile. So now he's like kind of a badass because he can say myname.com and it goes to his LinkedIn profile. But yes, you're absolutely right. I deeply regret not having DaveDelaney.com. I've got all the other ones, but don't even get started.
I had a friend who was one of the early guys at AOL, and his was jim@aol.com. But anyway.
It's like Tom on MySpace.
I rode the .com boom in working at a company called BarnesandNoble.com, and we all thought we would be millionaires because that Amazon, everybody was, millionaires from the public, Amazon going public, and we all thought that, but it was not Amazon. And then I just kind of stayed there. Then we had the .com bust and 9/11, and there was all sorts of things in my life that just basically said, you need a change. And I was tired of, one of the things I was tired of, which is this constant, like looking for a job and like interviewing and being dependent on other people to like pay me. And it just was exhausting for me. So I said, I need a career where it's going to be sustained for many years and where you're respected with gray hair, because many jobs, like especially in tech, so like if you're over a certain age, you were seen as, back then too, you were seen as like not cool. So
yeah.
I had reconnected with my roots as a psychologist, interested in psychology, and got into a PsyD program. And the PsyD is, there are two types of degrees for a psychologist, PsyD and a PhD. They're both basically the same, but the PsyD program didn't require the GRE. And the GRE was going to be a major hurdle for me with ADHD to study for that and prepare. And I just wanted to start. So I talked my way in and started graduate school, which was a lot of structure. And I always say, just yesterday, I had a client say, is graduate school good for me? And I said, absolutely, if it's actually what you are interested in. Because if you have ADHD and you're studying something your parents think you should study, or you for the money, and you're going to law school, it's a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be, because ADHD is not a problem of attention and focus. It's a problem of motivation. Why did it get that reputation and name? Because it was first diagnosed in children who had to focus and pay attention in school. Yeah. Well, they didn't ask the kids if they were actually interested in those subjects. They just said, you're not paying attention. Well, yeah, because it's super boring. That's another reason I say, parent to kids approaching college, you got to study something you're excited about. And if that means you're going to study photography and never become a photographer, but just get your BA, or you're going to just study acting, but you don't really actually want to be an actor, but you're just going to get a BA, do that. Because doing the core curriculum, 2 years of mandated classes in college, and then, it's really painful. Of course, you don't even have to go to college. But anyway, so then I got myself back into graduate school, and there's a lot of structure and what I call hoops of fire. You just have to jump through. You can't think just do it. Yeah. And then I began working with, I was always interested in working with kids. So my major in grad school was child psychology. And if you work with a lot of kids, you're going to know ADHD. And so most of the clients and kids I was working with in graduate school had ADHD or trauma. But basically, I remember doing an evaluation of a kid and giving the parents the questionnaire and reading it myself, and that was when it struck me that I was actually ADHD.
Wow.
And because I was reading this and thinking, oh my God, that was my problem.
Yeah.
But I was not a hyperactive kid in the sense of like making problems for the teacher. So therefore the teacher would have called my parent, and then they would have gotten me tested.
You were that inattentive presentation, right?
Well, let me talk about that for a second. Inattentive type, but I was not because many girls are quiet, but they have ADHD.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of girls. When I was working in my private practice in New York, I met a lot of little girls who were super hyperactive, but they manifested it as hyperverbal, talking a lot. But this idea that there's inattentive type, I have to say, in all my 15, maybe more, 20 years working with ADHD, very few inattentive types. Why? Because once we unpack the fact that hyperactivity, it's actually ADHD, ADHID, attention deficit, hyperactivity / impulsivity disorder. Yeah. And so, while a lot of adults say I'm ADD, I don't have H. And I say, well, let's investigate that, because when you start investigating even the so-called inattentive types like me, there is a lot of impulsivity.
Yeah.
Impulsive shopping, impulsive eating, impulsive stock buying, impulsive gambling, impulsive speaking, interrupting. So I think inattentive type is actually much more rare than people think. It is more prominent with ADHD, though.
Yeah.
I'm seeing that much more with clients who have autism. But anyway, back to this story, I that's when I self-diagnosed with ADHD, and then still was interested in working with people with ADHD. I did my training in Chicago and then in Los Angeles, working in South Central Los Angeles, which was a wonderful experience because we would go into the homes and do the therapy there.
Mm.
Because the families were foster families who had taken in a traumatized, neglected child, and they didn't have the means to like drive back and forth between their house and the clinic, so we would drive to them.
Was this the clinic you were working with at the time, or?
Yeah, this was my what we call the internship and postdoc after, at the final piece of your graduate school training.
Okay. That's great.
So then I saw, what I did see there is a lot of overdiagnosis of not only ADHD, but the diagnosis du jour, and that is a thing. Diagnoses are fashionable, and at that time, the fashion was bipolar disorder in children, and all these kids were traumatized, but it looked like to these psychiatrists like bipolar, and they were pumping them full of bipolar meds, which are very different from ADHD meds. But I learned a lot about ADHD and the misdiagnosis, and then I moved to New York City and worked for Dr. Hallowell at the Hallowell Center.
Oh, wow.
And what I learned from him is this whole idea of strength-based approach. He has something called VAST now, which is variable attention. Basically, he sees ADHD as a strength and as a superpower. And that was helpful to me because I, at that time, did not. But now I have a more, balanced idea that there are some silver linings, but it's a problem. It's not an amazing superpower, but because we have to adapt, if like you're blind, your hearing may improve.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think so. I mean, I work for Daredevil. I don't know if it.
That makes sense. I interviewed on a previous podcast, Richard Turner, who's like one of the most famous close-up magician. He specializes in, he calls himself a card mechanic, but he's the kicker to it is he's 100% blind and went blind as a kid. And it was a fascinating conversation, but you're right. Yeah. Your other senses do, I don't know if it's a scientific thing, but certainly can't, anecdotally from his perspective, certainly some of the stuff, because he's also a black belt in karate, blind.
Yeah. So we develop other abilities. And I definitely think that happens with ADHD. You know what you're not good at, and then you focus on the things you're good at.
Yeah. You kind of compensate, I guess, even whether you knowingly, because I think that's true from my own perspective as well. Like, one thing I'm curious about, and I know you've covered a lot there, just explaining that. I mean, I did have to plug that both my kids were in South Korea and Japan just a week ago. They went on a school trip.
Wow, that's an awesome school.
Yeah. It was great. My wife and I met backpacking in Ireland. I'm from Canada, from Toronto, and she's from Tennessee, which is why we live in Nashville now. But so one of our family mottos is, experiences over things, and the idea that travel is incredibly important. There's a St. Augustine line that I love, which is the world is a book, and those who have not traveled only turn one page or something, or only read one page, something like that. So the fact that you embrace travel and stuff, my wife and I ran out of money backpacking back in the day in Prague, of all places, and had to teach English, just through a company, but we had to, go around Prague teaching English to mainly business professionals, just in order to save up enough money to get back to Ireland and get our jobs back there. And so, I love some of what you're saying there earlier. I mean, it's interesting what I've learned with my own diagnosis and, doing this podcast and my therapy and all that good stuff about, my understanding, at least, of the three sort of presentations of ADHD, and, that, which is my understanding, at least, is obviously not a doctor, nor do I ever claim to be on the internet or elsewhere for that matter. But my understanding is that there's one type of ADHD, but 3 presentations. And, as we spoke about ADHD-I, which is inattentive, high, which I usually use the analogy of Lisa Simpson. And then we've got Bart Simpson, who's ADHD high or HI, hyperactive impulsive.
Definitely.
And then I use Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes as the example for ADHD-C, which is the combined presentation. But I'm curious actually, as this is something that I don't know for sure, and maybe you do, I don't know. But as we obviously, let's say you're hyperactive, right? Impulsive. And that was me as a kid. I was the Bart Simpson, right? And so often I understand that a lot of girls were missed from a combination of sort of misogyny and sexism, but in addition to that, just the fact that they were quiet, or not just girls, but anybody like yourself who was more predominantly inattentive, you weren't disrupting the class. Therefore, it wasn't really a problem to solve for the teacher. Where hyperactive is, that the one that most often, like myself, that would get into trouble. My question though is combined type. Is this, or combined presentation, I should say, is this something that people are diagnosed with, or is it something, or as we mature into adults, we let's say we're hyperactive impulsive, we channel, I'm not running around disrupting things anymore. However, my brain is often doing that, as is my mouth, clearly. Do we become more combined as we age and mature?
Well, I do, like I said, I am not a religious person.
Yeah.
Why is that? Because the Bible, whatever your religion, it's like that's it. It's set in stone. There's don't change it. It's been the same way for 2,000 years. And that always bothered me because, that we grow and change. And I think the DSM and is not a Bible. It's, it's written. It was written by like 5 or 6 psychiatrists in a room. That's it. That's it. So it's not a Bible, although it's referred to as a Bible. So in my practice, I rarely, if ever, diagnose inattentive type. And I have never, ever, not once, never diagnosed hyperactive type alone. Never. It's never, ever, ever, ever happened. Yeah. So my point is, most people, if not 99%, except for the people who are ADHD, are, I think, combined type. So I just call it ADHD because I can find the impulsivity in you.
Right. And I suppose it's apples and oranges at the end of the day. I mean, as far as labels go, you don't, at least my understanding is you wouldn't really, and we're talking about adults here, right? Not children so much, because the podcast is for late diagnosed adults. But regardless of what presentation ADHD you are or have or what have you, at the end of the day, I think you're sort of treating it in a similar way through therapy, through medication, stimulants usually, and not to mention the comorbidities that often come along with the package, which again, correct me where I'm wrong, but my understanding, at least in my case too, is that, anxiety and depression are the fun ones that tend to come along with it. But for others, it could be OCD, it could be bipolar, as you mentioned as well, to a lesser degree. Is that that's right? Or
let me say this: I think, as you said, anxiety and depression are basically symptoms of ADHD or being neurodivergent and autistic. So if you come to me and you're not anxious and you're not or have bouts of depression, I'm going to wonder if you're actually ADHD.
Yeah.
Because it's so common, because we have a lot of social difficulties and managing life. And if you have a hard time managing life, it's going to create more anxiety and depression. There are co-occurring, obviously autism is very common. OCD is common. But if you have a bipolar diagnosis and ADHD, or also BPD, borderline personality disorder. If you come to me with a BPD or bipolar, I'm really skeptical what's actually going on here. And what I mean by that is like, I think a lot of doctors misdiagnose ADHD, particularly ADHD, as bipolar and or borderline personality disorder. So
isn't it often though that it's missed because, and this is my understanding from Russ Barkley, is that, and what happens is that a person is diagnosed with, let's say, depression, and they're treated for depression, but for whatever reason, the doctor who diagnosed them with, let's say, depression didn't do testing or have enough knowledge, let's say, about ADHD to realize that that is sort of at the root. And so when the ADHD gets missed in the mix, then being treated for the depression through meds and therapy and what have you, while that can help you, the core problem at hand or the root of the problem is that ADHD that's still untreated and even unknown at that point. Does that sound sort of?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's very common with women because of stereotypes. The old hysterical, histrionic female stereotypes and tropes that fortunately are changing. But I think a lot of women were misdiagnosed with anxiety or depression and treated with SSRIs, which absolutely, you're right, doesn't treat the underlying ADHD. And if the ADHD was treated, maybe they wouldn't be so anxious and depressed. If they were diagnosed with ADHD and joined ADA and listened to your podcasts and felt more at ease with their difference, maybe they wouldn't feel so anxious and depressed. So,
but are we comparing depression and anxiety? Because, and again, always, as I say, I'm not a doctor, so that's why I have smart people like you on the show. Is like, I feel like, and I could be wrong here, but I feel like people can have anxiety that is not clinical. They could be anxious about businesses hurting and whatever things are going on. They could have anxious feelings so much that they have anxiety, let's say. But isn't there a difference between like that kind of anxiety and an actual clinical diagnosis of anxiety as an ongoing condition?
Well, yeah, I mean,
and depression or what
severity and significance is the key for a diagnosis. How strong is it and how much does it impact your life in a negative way?
Yes.
But I mean, if you've been in a room with somebody who's anxious, it's just so palpable and obvious that anxiety is the problem. But, I think what happened is particularly women would go to a doctor, they didn't know they had ADHD, and they would feel like, I can't calm down. My mind is always racing, which is a hyperactive, restless mind.
Yes.
And, I always feel like I'm not living up to expectations. I'm depressed all the time. Well, let's kill two birds with one stone with an SSRI here and Zola. But those are just descriptions of life with ADHD, so that doesn't mean you couldn't have both. You can certainly have both clinical levels, and you can be treated for both. Like with, I'm not a psychiatrist, so you could probably take both. Some people are on both stimulants and SSRIs.
I am. Yeah, I'm on both.
Yeah, but my point is, like, let's open up the box and see fully and see what's in there. And like I said, I think anxiety and depression are just symptoms of ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
Especially, I find anxiety, a lot of the anxieties around expectations of success and expectations that you feel you're not keeping up with,
Yeah.
And a lot of women are on Instagram and, the Instagram mom, the perfect mother. And also women have the extra burden of feeling like they have to take care of others.
Yeah.
The way that men don't. And therefore, that requires executive functioning to run the house and a career and take care of the kids. And so, you're going to crack with that.
Yeah.
And then you go to your doctor, I'm overwhelmed. I can't, I'm just so anxious. My mind is racing. Well, you have anxiety. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. That goes without saying. Yeah. Well, and nowadays too, I mean, what's great also is that and that's what I find with the listeners of my podcast a lot as well, is that so many more women are now being diagnosed. And part of that is also because, generalizing, of course, but like as a mom, maybe you're taking care of the child more and your child is suffering from undiagnosed ADHD. So the child gets diagnosed. And then what we know now, at least my understanding again, is that it's roughly, I think it's by gender, but it's something like 70 to 75 to 80% heritable, which means that one or both of your parents, if you have ADHD, it means that one or both of your parents probably does too. And from our generation, Generation X, I think this is my theory about the trauma piece of it, is that for our generation, our parents, and I definitely know both, well, undiagnosed, but I definitely know both of my parents had ADHD. It accounts for the trauma that we, and I use the royal we, but we experienced growing up with parents or a parent who was ADHD and didn't know it and may have struggled with lashing out or violence or addictions or things like that ended up affecting childhood. And I had some of that. So anything that I'm saying there that resonates, not with your life necessarily, but with, in general, what you're seeing?
Yeah. So this is a difference I see where there's a guy named Gabor Mate, I think his name is.
Yeah. And he's bad news.
So he, I've listened to him and he talks about how ADHD is misdiagnosed trauma from childhood. Well, I do think people with ADHD experience a lot more rejection. Yeah. And that's been shown in science. We get like 20,000 more messages of rejection. And those are little tiny paper cuts every day. I'm not going to say, but they suck.
Yes.
And so we do grow up with a lot of self-doubt and self-esteem issues. And all of that is similar to people who experience trauma or grew up in abusive homes. Now, some of the parents, like you said, it's very heritable. It's very genetic. So if your parent has ADHD and passed it down to you, that's how you got it. But that also means that they may have had a difficult time being a really sensitive parent because they were bored. I mean, playing with a baby, or a little kid can get boring. So, like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to spend time because it's stressful. And so you may not have gotten sensitive parenting. Does that mean you're traumatized? No, there's something, the good enough parent, but there are also parents who, because of their ADHD, became alcoholics or drug addicts and then became abusive. Like 25% of the prison population, they say, is ADHD. So
yeah, it's crazy.
So I do not think ADHD is misdiagnosed trauma.
No. And that's a big problem with Gabor Mate's take on it, who is not an ADHD expert, who I think, my understanding with him is that he, certainly there's validity to some of his stuff, some of the work that he's done and what have you, I guess. I don't really know him very well, but I do know about his take on ADHD, and it's completely misinformation or worse, disinformation, because he should know better than to.
Yeah, I mean, he did experience himself a lot of trauma.
He did, yes, absolutely.
In World War II, which is, and I did see a lot of foster kids diagnosed with ADHD. So there are a lot of there are times when kids are, particularly little kids, are misdiagnosed if they're off the walls, but they're traumatized, but they obviously came from a traumatized home, which is why they're in foster care.
Yeah. Yes.
So let's diagnose them with complex PTSD just as a matter of course, because they've been removed from a parent.
Yeah.
But that parent probably also has ADHD. So
right, which must be harder too, because if you adopted a child who is experiencing ADHD symptoms and maybe you don't know yet or what have you, but they're perhaps causing some difficulties, or you're frustrated and you're air quotes neurotypical, which I liked your take on that, parent, and because they're an adopted child, it must be extra frustrating because there's no way for you to really know until diagnosis and treatment that what ADHD is like, because you don't have it. Like I said, like with the women who are now finding out they have ADHD because their kids are getting diagnosed and they see it in themselves, which is pretty common, I think, nowadays. That doesn't happen, obviously, because it's an adopted parent, so they may not have ADHD.
Yeah, I mean, that requires like a master's degree in parenting to parent a child with, particularly adopted. I worked with adopted kids from Russia who had fetal alcohol syndrome, which is like ADHD like times 10.
I can't imagine.
That was really difficult. But
you were talking about neurotypical, actually. What did you call it again?
The mythicals.
Neuromythical?
No, just mythical.
Just mythical.
There's nobody. That's one of the gifts of becoming a therapist and working with people, many of them who didn't have ADHD, but they had a whole host of other issues. So there's nobody who's immune from life's challenges and mental health problems.
I've had a conversation on the podcast with a couple of people, and I've mentioned it to friends and others too, where it was because I was diagnosed at 50, right? So not that long ago. And as I started doing this podcast and things, I started thinking, man, I would love to have like a air quotes neurotypical person on the show to find out like, what the hell is your life like? Because now that I'm looking at my life and my experiences through the lens of ADHD and understanding what I call my operating system, oh my God, like how do you can stay focused on your taxes and spreadsheets with no problem and like all these, you're not stressed out and you're not like, and to your point, I mean, that was kind of my take on it too, is like everybody even with ADHD, as I've constantly heard from professionals that, there's no two ADHD cases that are the same. I mean, it is an acronym. It does stand for something that's arguable, but it is an actual thing. So we do have some commonalities, but for the most part too, it's one ADHDer could be completely different than another ADHDer, but have some underlying, consistent things. Yeah.
It's called being human.
Right.
And this idea, this is really a social movement, because this idea that people with ADHD are like defective, is totally not relevant or not true anymore in today's society with social media and things like that. It's just a difference.
Yes.
And neurological difference, neurodiversity.
Yeah.
And that's been so powerful for me in my journey, because, I think this is hard for men. Most of the men I see, in like the older men who are diagnosed, have a lot of shame around, and I'm talking today, about ADHD and what does it mean to be ADHD or autistic. It's just like, oh no, this is a bad thing. But most of the women or non-binary folks or trans folks, and we see a lot, they don't see it like that. I diagnose them and I say, the evidence shows you are you have ADHD or you are autistic, and they're happy. They're happy not because they have ADHD or autism, but because they know what's going on. But more importantly, it doesn't come with the judgment, the self-judgment, because of social media and the global community or the national community that's like, this is not a disorder.
Yes.
I always say it doesn't mean you don't have challenges like getting things done and organized and things like that, but everybody has something.
Yeah.
This is your unique one.
Right. And that's absolutely right. I mean, I think of it as I said before, like as my operating system, and, knowledge is power and self-knowledge is gold, because when you know how you function in the world and maybe perhaps why you are the way you are in certain aspects, good or bad, understanding yourself. This is a big part. Like I have a presentation I do, and I'm working on my next book and have been for the longest time, called The Root Down. And it's about knowing yourself, accepting and respecting yourself, and then connecting yourself, helping to put an end to loneliness and actually finding the others, as they say. And knowing, that first step has to be knowing yourself. And I think, knowing your strengths. And I know, even though they're unscientific, I am a big fan of all, Myers-Briggs and DISC and all the other, strengths finder assessments that you can do to better understand with some clarity on, just who you are and how you function in the world. And I think, as I said, those are unscientific, but they're still a good way to kind of get an idea of yourself. And if you know your operating system is ADHD, then you can add that information to that package and then really start to understand yourself and your strengths and how you show up in the world and the benefits you have. You mentioned earlier about superpower, and I wrote I wrote a post a while ago, and I've talked about it on the show before, about my theory with superpower and ADHD, which is if you, and I've actually created this on Wise Squirrels, but if you picture a graph, and on that graph, the top is, so my theory, I'll just shut up. My theory is basically that the higher your privilege, the more likely you will consider or call your ADHD a superpower, and vice versa. The lower, meaning if you are impoverished, homeless, perhaps you're in jail.
Oh yeah, that sounds true.
Right? It's not a superpower. That's what got me in this jail.
Yeah,
I wasn't thinking right. But on the flip side, if you're Paris Hilton, who conveniently wrote a song about her superpower being ADHD, which is now sort of an anthem for some people. If you have Paris Hilton money, God bless her. I know she's had her own experiences, negative, and so, but she has the security to and access and to be able to gamble on whatever she wants to gamble on from a creative point of view. And if it fails, it fails. It's not a big deal. She's not going to be homeless tomorrow. So it's not a superpower.
I think that is true, because,
or it is for her.
I always had a visceral reaction when people would say it's a superpower, and the visceral reaction was, you don't have ADHD, because if you did, you couldn't say I have a superpower, because it's I'm going to give you an example. I was flying to London. The other company I work with is in London, and I'm now living in Puerto Rico, and I flew to New York, and I got on the train to a JFK, and on the train I realized I didn't have my passport.
Oh gosh.
Why? Because I have ADHD. And so what I had to do was postpone the flight and make a round trip flight back here, 4 hours. And I literally came into my home, picked up the passport off the kitchen table, and got back on another flight. That's ADHD. Where, the superpower, I do think there are, like I said, silver linings I prefer than superpowers.
But you have the, not to put you under, but like to say, like you yourself have you can afford to have missed the flight and have to buy another one. You can afford to take a cab to your house to pick it up. And even then, wherever you were going and traveling to, that could wait a day or two and the world's not going to implode. Right. But like, if you're like, you've been late for work 3 times, you're a single mom, and then you're late because you forgot something, your wallet at home, and you get your wallet, and you show up at work and you get fired now, and you're raising kids and you're low income. That's a whole.
Well, yes, I 100% agree.
Yeah.
100%
So that's
agree.
Yeah.
But I mean, I was that that person for many years, I would say, of my life. The struggle. Why are my friends succeeding? Why am I not succeeding? And that's what really helped me, push me back to grad school. So but I do think this idea of privilege impacting how you feel about yourself.
Right. I think everybody has superpowers, right? That's the key point message here too, is that everybody does have superpowers. I have exercises I do with my clients to define what those superpowers are, but it's not a neurotype. It's not ADHD that is the superpower. Your superpower may be minus communication. Right.
Yeah.
Like I'm great at public speaking and I love people. So like one of my superpowers is extroversion and the way that I show up with audiences or with, my clients and so forth, or at networking events or whatever. So those are some storytelling, things like that, comedy, like these are some of my superpowers, but and you could say that ADHD plays a role in some of those perhaps, but but yeah, that's a different ball of wax. I would say.
Well, it is. I mean, you found out you had ADHD, and somehow you made a very successful podcast, and you got all this podcast equipment and figured it all out, and that requires energy, persistence, and kind of passion,
yes.
which can be that is the silver lining of ADHD, and then if you find something that actually fits your personality, and you could create Virgin Records and Virgin Airline, or JetBlue, I think was started by somebody with ADHD.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. Yeah. Same with Toys R Us, same with Spanx, same with, Virgin as well. I know. I don't think Richard Branson's really talked. I haven't heard too much of him talking about his ADHD, but he's very outspoken about his dyslexia, which is also a comorbidity. At least my understanding that goes along with, that can go along with ADHD. So yeah.
Learning challenges. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I would be remiss not to mention Inflow, of course. And thank you again for supporting what I'm doing here. Without a commercial, but like, tell me a little bit about how, because obviously you're a smart guy and you're educated, and you have, obviously, the entrepreneurial bug has bitten you multiple times over the years. So tell me a little bit about how how Inflow came to be.
Well, one of the things they don't teach you in grad school is how to market your private practice. So I spent a long time after I left the Hallowell Center in New York, I set up a private practice, and then spent a lot of time marketing it. And through that, 10 years later, during COVID, I got a LinkedIn message from a young man in London who was an entrepreneur and a tech kind of guru, one of these young geniuses. And he and his partner, his friend, wanted to start a company for people with ADHD, a digital app, and they needed somebody who was a so-called expert in ADHD. And through all the marketing and stuff that I had done, I guess they found me, and we hit it off because I, in a way, have never grown up. And so I still like video games, and they, of course, were young guys playing FIFA video games. So we hit it off based on my interest in that. So whoever says you shouldn't be playing video games because it's childish, it helped me get a deeper connection with these guys. And right away we hit it off and started a company called Inflow, which, as I said, is a mobile app. It's really a learning program to bridge the gap between, you and your psychiatrist, and you and your therapist, your coach, because your coach or especially psychiatrists, can't share or teach you everything about ADHD. And what we've done is curated all the best tools, tips, and techniques, because, there's a lot of fluff out there that doesn't work. Like, buy a planner, and that whole, like this. So I, with my ADHD, went through and we found all the tools and tips for every challenge, and it's audio format learning program for adults with ADHD. And now we're excited about, we have a new AI, I don't know what you would call it, a coach AI therapist called Quinn. Now we're getting into scary territory. But this agent or coach is basically takes all the information in our database, all the stuff I've curated, and you can chat with it and have a real conversation, a very empathetic, supportive, and surprisingly real conversation with Quinn about your ADHD and ways to manage it. And so,
how have you been finding that? I was a speaker for Google for about 6 years, and I teach my clients and do presentations about using AI, and both the combination of sort of the dangers and the benefits of AI. I mean, certainly, you'd be silly not to be using AI these days, at least to prepare for what's coming and be ahead of competitors and so forth. But as far as AI agents go, there is concern in how, like, let's say ChatGPT will hallucinate or not even answer, will make up the answer because I always say like in that case, like AI is sort of like one of your best, like, well, at least one of my best friends who like never really knows the answer, but will act like he does. And he'll be like, yeah, man, I'm 99% sure of that.
Well, the difference is this. ChatGPT is pulling information from the entire World Wide Web.
Yeah.
And, as I said, that's not curated. So we don't know. If you had problems with your kidney, you wouldn't go to a general doctor. I hope you'd go to a specialist in kidney problems. And that's what Quinn is, a specialist in ADHD. So Quinn takes the information from this database of content that we've curated. And then on top of that, we've really worked hard with the engineers to write prompts so that Quinn is really supportive, empathetic, and much, I think, better than ChatGPT in that respect.
That's great. So it's like a chat. So it's like a chat bot. I mean, it's an AI agent, but it's like a chat bot that actually, because if you host your own LLM, you can give it its own data set so that it's not telling you to like, just journal with colorful pens.
Right. That's another one. Journal. Well, look, I'm not making, but who really is going to actually journal, sustain it, And the other one I hate is take 3 deep breaths. It's like, no, I'm in a bad mood or I'm in a super anxious state. I can't like even think about taking 3 breaths. I need something more practical and doable. By the way, for that, let me give you a tip. For any kind of like anxiety or emotional dysregulation, I recommend a migraine cap. You know what a migraine cap is?
I don't.
These are kind of spongy material that for people who have actual migraines, you put it in your freezer.
Oh, sure.
And you pop it over your head, and it's a compression and also cold. And that seems to work for migraines. I don't know anything about migraines, but I do know that for emotional dysregulation, anxiety, and meltdowns, they have found that changing your body temperature actually works to calm your mood. And you could do that under a heating blanket or a hot shower or a cold shower. But this is just, go to your freezer and you can spray it with some lavender spray and pop it on. But also the cold, yes, it is cold, but the compression really also, for some reason, is soothing and calms you down. So that's the type of tool and tip we have at Inflow and Quinn knows, as opposed to like, just take 3 deep breaths and journal. And
right.
Yeah.
That's a great tip. Yeah. I interviewed Ari Fletcher on the podcast, and he was, I believe it was Ari. It might've been another guest. I can't remember, but was talking about, recent, I think it's pretty recent of confirmation on how, changing the body temperature, I believe cold, especially really does help with ADHD and probably subsequent anxiety as well with that. So that's a great tip. I haven't thought about that. My wife suffers from migraines, so she has that one of those masks, but I've never thought to. And we actually just went to a spa when we were in Banff just a couple of weeks ago when we were bumming around hiking across Alberta and British Columbia, and we went to a spa and they had the cold plunge there. And so we were going through like following the rules, like 4 minutes cold plunge, 4 minutes hot, and so on. And we both, like our other experiences with air quote cold plunges in the past, where we put our feet in and then we're like, screw this, let's get back in the hot tub, and we did that. And then this dude comes in, because it's communal space. This dude comes in and he's like all zen, and he gets in right up to his neck without missing a beat, and he's in there with the timer going down for 4 minutes, and then he walks out without screaming, and we're like, God damn it. All right, we got to try this. And I was able to submerge myself for 3 minutes, and my wife did too.
Okay,
and we were pretty proud of that. But maybe it's partly, I don't know, maybe it's partly just the shock of the change that, I don't know whether you get dopamine from that or some sort of adrenaline boost, maybe. And then, because my understanding with ADHD, at least, when you're craving dopamine, that when you do receive that dopamine, perhaps that helps you then kind of get in the zone or focus or kind of get over whatever, you're thinking. I don't know. I know like Peter Shankman's been on the podcast. He jumps out of airplanes to write books, but not everybody has that luxury.
Yeah, I don't know how that would help, but the compression, they for kids with ADHD and autism, they give weighted vests.
Yeah. Okay. I've heard of that.
This concept of weighted blankets, this concept of compression, or some people with autism like say, just sit on me, like I'll feel better. And so that's why the migraine caps work.
Yeah, that's a great tip. Any other tips that of that would be helpful for folks? I mean, obviously, putting aside the importance of stimulants, the importance of medication, because I know, and therapy, and the Inflow app, by the way, is fantastic. I really am enjoying it, and I love your guided sections, like your kind of mini podcast clips within the app itself to help people. I mean, I find it really helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, like I said, it's been a long time figuring out what's going to work and what's not going to work. So yeah, I mean, there's so many tips out there, but here's the biggest one. ADHD is like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and or the game Chutes and Ladders or Snakes and Ladders in England or whatever.
Yeah.
It's so important to understand that we're managing like a lifelong challenge. We can make improvements 100%, but often I tell clients after they're diagnosed, they say, what should I do? What should I do? And I say, please don't do anything actually for 6 months, except read, go on Wise Squirrel podcast, listen and educate yourself about what is ADHD. But often there's a rush to fix ourselves. And in that process, we fail because of the executive functioning problems. And then we feel even worse. Oh, nothing's worked. I'm totally hopeless.
Right.
So I say, take time just to learn what it means to be a little bit different. And also listening to podcasts and joining Inflow and joining Reddit and ADA and different communities, you feel like, oh, they don't really feel shame about their ADHD, right?
Yeah.
Dave doesn't really feel bad about his ADHD, and neither does George. So maybe I shouldn't either.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, like I said, knowing your operating system, like understanding. I mean, it's, if anything, you should celebrate it, because just knowing, oh, I'm ADHD. Okay. That explains a lot, but moving forward in life without falling down rabbit holes and depressive thoughts about what ifs and all that, but instead thinking not to downplay it, but don't go there, but instead think about the future and how tapping into how your brain functions can greatly benefit your business or your career or what have, or your family life or dating or whatever.
Absolutely, because one of the most debilitating symptoms of ADHD is shame. And fortunately, like I said, a lot of the younger folks are not feeling that. That's not a part of their lives now. But some of us older still struggle with the shame of that. So joining and educating yourself and joining communities is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my God, George, the time has just flown by here. I've really been enjoying this conversation.
You can check out Inflow for we have a week's free trial. And if you forget to unsubscribe, we have a 28-day grace period for 80. So just email us and we'll refund you. We're not trying to take advantage of anyone with ADHD. We're just trying to help people better understand themselves, feel less shame about their ADHD, and to make positive steps towards improving their life.
Yeah, thank you. And for folks listening, just visit wisesquirrels.com/inflow, and that will let George and his team know that you heard about it here first. Also, that helps me prove to you why, supporting Wise Squirrels is worthwhile, financially. And I do appreciate, again, your support of the show. How can folks get a hold of you if they have questions or want to follow up?
Well, they can, at the link you just mentioned, they can download Inflow and give it a try. If they are interested in a evaluation for those that are not diagnosed, or they want a formal evaluation, they can contact me at sacscenter.com. That's SACHS center.com. And we have telehealth evaluations that are reasonable. And if they want therapy, they can certainly contact me at that same website.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, I do. We have a free assessment at wisesquirrels.com, but it's from the Mental Health Association of America. Regardless of the outcome, you need to speak to a medical professional to diagnose you properly. So, so I do encourage folks to reach out to George here. Yeah, I was going to say something about that diagnosis, reaching out. Oh, yes. Something I always add too when I talk about this now is, if you go to your own GP, your own general practitioner, your family doctor, or what have you, I always recommend people to ask your doctor first before asking about a diagnosis, asking your doctor, hey, so what do you think about ADHD?
Yes. Oh, good question.
Because a lot of doctors are still quacks. They still don't believe in it or whatever. And it's really good for a couple of reasons to ask that question, because if they say, everybody has a little, to run away and go find a new doctor. And in addition to that, if your doctor does say something like that, then they may also say, everybody has a little cancer, or everybody has a little heart disease. Don't worry about it. Or it doesn't exist. Diabetes, so what else don't they believe in? So that's a good question for anybody, regardless of their thoughts about ADHD. Just ask their doctor, what do you think about ADHD? And maybe it's time to find someone new. All right, brother. Well, George, this has been awesome. Again, we kept you a little long, so thanks a million for being here. And I really do appreciate your time and insights.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thanks for tuning in to Wise Squirrels. Please make sure you follow the show so you never miss an episode. If you enjoyed the show, leave a review, please, and visit wisesquirrels.com/love for bonus content, audio comments that you can leave, membership information, free coaching, sponsorship details, booking information, and much more. Drop by wisesquirrels.com/love. Check out the link in the episode description below and explore now. Thanks again for listening.
Hey, it's Dr. George Sachs, co-founder of Inflow and proud sponsor of Wise Squirrels. If you're living with ADHD, you know it's not just about the focus. That's why we created Inflow. And our newest tool, Quinn AI, an empathetic ADHD micro coach. Together, they're designed by expert clinicians to help you understand your brain, build habits that actually stick, and feel less alone in the process. Take the free ADHD traits quiz at wisesquirrels.com/inflow to get started.
Hey, I'm not sure if you know about this, but I was a speaker and a trainer for Google for nearly 6 years. In addition to this, I've been a coach through a lot of my career, helping small business owners and entrepreneurs improve their businesses. But now with ADHD, I've learned a lot about helping other wise squirrels like me. Check out the link at wisesquirrels.com/coaching and book a free session with me to see if I can help you. I have a feeling I can.